Ning Tian, who is our regional operations head for Greater China. So we will kickstart our webinar today, and I'll let Ning share a bit more about remote proctoring. Over to you, Ning.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ning Tian, the head of operation for the Cambridge Assessment in English Great China. Today, I'm very glad to share some insights and a case study about the remote proctoring. Almost 11 months ago, and our lifetime away from the coronavirus, I think the remote proctoring solution is still very brand new idea and the emerging solution for most exam board. Some organizations and the exam users at that time were hesitant to apply this solution due to the different reasons. For example, like the cost reasons, technical limitations, and reliability considerations, etc., etc. However, due to the breakout of the coronavirus in the couple of months ago, so this crisis actually push all of exam board to think about that. How can we deliver our test under this special period? And how can we ensure the healthy and safety of our candidates when we deliver our test? So I think that's the key reason about why the remote proctoring solution witnessed a significant growth in the past 10 months. So before I introduce the case study, I would like to have a definition about remote proctoring. Actually, it's quite simple. It's not complicated definition. Remote proctoring is just a kind of service that acts as the role of an on-site invigilator, or we can say the human invigilator, to ensure the quality and the reliability of the exam. So that's very simple definition of the remote proctoring. They used some different features with some technology solution and algorithm to ensure the reliability of an exam, and at the same time to prevent some potential malpractice. The features can be included like the candidate ID verification, audio video live stream, or maybe audio video recording function, and some AI features to detect potential suspicious activities or inappropriate behaviors. They also use some system check software to check the browsing limitation, the screen freeze features, and to protect the item bank, and sometimes the constant web monitoring, etc., etc. To summarize, so we think the advantage of the remote proctoring solution. The first one is on-demand access, like some advocate said. So our solution can help you deliver the test there and anytime. Another advantage is that so they can help the exam providers and safeguarding the exam security and item bank security, because item bank is the key issues for us when we deliver our test. And the last advantage, I think, it can provide a health and safe environment for our candidates, and at the same time, so they can help the candidates to relieve their stress during the exam. So next deck, please. So normally when we introduce or apply a remote proctoring solution, we suggest that we need to take into the consideration from the different demand from our different key stakeholders. In this deck, I identified 4 key stakeholders for exam. Previous deck, please. Yes. The first one is the assessment board, like us, Cambridge Assessment English, or the other assessment board. What's the key things we need to take into the consideration. I think the first one is the ID fraud. So we need to ensure the candidate is him or herself. This is very important. Another key thing for us is about the end-to-end exam security and the item bank security. At the same time, we need to provide enough user-friendly user experience to our candidates to ensure the reliability. And for the exam users, like the universities, schools, and the corporate sectors, so what's the key consideration from these stakeholders? I think the ID fraud is first a priority, and the exam reliability, because when we do our business development to introduce this solution, some of our potential clients, they may ask, so you are using the different remote proctoring provider, so how do we ensure we are using the same criteria to deliver the test? And the credibility of assessment providers, like via the Cambridge, so to some end to show our credibility. And for some clients, they also interested in the detailed processes of the remote proctoring, so that's the exam users consideration. And for our candidates, like I mentioned before, so they focus on if the whole process is user friendly. Same time, they may put their privacy as the first priority. They may ask, so how do you use my information? How do you use my data? Will you share my information to the outside storage our data? I think this is about the GDPR consideration, etc., etc. And for the test delivery channel partners, like our centers, so what's the key factors they would like to take into consideration? Again, the ID fraud. So we need to avoid any potential malpractice from the ID fraud perspective. At the same time, the detailed processes of the remote proctoring at the cost, because sometimes our centers, they need to build their cash flow to evaluate if it's worth to investment the remote proctoring solution, and if it's a practical and feasible, easier to deploy, and data candidate information management. So that's the key factors to be considered by our channel partners. So in the next session, I would like to use a real case and to show how our channel partner in the mainland China to apply the remote proctoring solution for the lingual skill. Next deck, please. So here is let's start from the registration platform. So from the left to the right, that's the full processes about the registration. A candidate just use the WeChat. That's the very famous social media platform, and visit. We call it a little bigot of the WeChat. Just filling their and submit their information, make the payment. Then they finish their times. If our B2B clients, they have the certain demand, this solution also can be support some B2B requirements. Next step, please. After the registration, the candidate will receive an email. So I would like to emphasize that in the remote proctoring solution, the information flow management and the information sharing is very important for every key stakeholders, especially for our candidates. So this letter to show all of necessary steps and what will happen in the next coming days from you receive this email to the exam day and after the exam. So when the candidates go through this email, they will receive another email. Next deck, please. This email is sent from our remote proctoring provider. So they will get you to run the system check and to get you how do you well prepared the environment for the exam day. Next deck, please. So you can run the system check. Normally, the remote proctoring provider suggests the candidate to run the system check before 48 hours before the exam. But normally we suggest that so the candidate run this check as early as possible. It's basically just add-ins in the Windows system, and you just download the software and run these tools, and they will check from your microphone, speakers, bandwidth, webcam, mobile, and the screen share, etc., to ensure your laptop or your computer is suitable for delivering the test. Next step, please. After that, so you will get another email that's about the exam day. The remote proctoring provider, they will arrange the exam day according to their capacity. And when you receive this email, you can fully prepare your exams because you know what's the detailed exam day and when you will participate in the exam. Next step, please. So on the exam day, so this is the remote proctoring platform. So you will get the detailed instruction. How do you log in in the system and use this token to start a test? Next step, please. So on the exam day, they also check your system again. And when you click the start, the next step, please. So there is a very user-friendly guidance to help the candidates to relieve their pressure, such as so you can take this time to use the toilet, and ensure there is no other in your room, and your room is well lighted. So next step, please. So and they also will guide you how to head the monitoring tools in your system tray. Next step, please. And so they also will guide you how to do the ID check. As per I mentioned before, I think the ID fraud is the key issues we need to pay more attention in any test. Next step, please. So you should hold your ID card and take the photos like showing in this screen. Next step, please. After the ID check, your picture will be uploaded to the server of the remote proctoring provider. Next step, please. And you will be required to run the environment check. It's like what I'm doing right now. You need to check your environment and to ensure there is no mobile phone on your top, etc., etc. Next step, please. Now, basically, after the environment check, so they can start the test. Next step, please. So, so they emphasize that some pages should be remain open during the whole end-to-end processes of the text of the exam. Next step, please. So basically, here is the administration back office, like showing in this slide, right hand of this slide. So some of the invigilators, they can use the live stream solution to monitor the candidates take the test from home. Next text, please. At the same time, our channel partner, they also develop an information management system to manage from the token of the candidates and how to share the information with the remote proctoring provider and how to send the email and the notification to our candidates. So that's the backward administration system. Next step, please. So they use this system to manage all the info of the test. So you can see the duration of the time and the test day and the candidate's name and the invigilator's name and some detailed requirements for each test. Next step, please. So if everything runs smoothly, so the remote proctoring provider, they will issue a remote proctoring report. So, and if no any issues had been identified, so that report will be a very clean report, and the candidate can use that report with their certificate to apply schools, etc., etc. That's all my part. In the next part, my colleague Justin, he will introduce about the remote assessor solution in the speaking test. Thank you.
Thanks, Ning, and thanks for sharing more details on this particular case study of one of many remote proctoring providers. Please note that this is just one case study, but it's a very good example of how remote proctoring software application actually works in tandem with our exams, in this case, LinguaSkill. Moving on to the second part of our presentation, and that's on remote assessor speaking tests. Now, during this COVID-19 period, as Ning has mentioned, there's a lot of disruption going on, and many centers may find local health and safety regulations. They require safe distancing within the exam venue, including the speaking test room. Or centers may find that their speaking examiners are unable to travel domestically to the exam venue due to COVID-19 movement restrictions in the cities that they live in. Now, therefore, centers can leverage on the remote assessor speaking test method to reduce the number of persons in the speaking test room, or allow the speaking examiner to join the speaking test without being physically present in the speaking test room. So I'm going to share more about this with our audience today. So before the speaking test day itself, what do centers need to prepare in order to use this remote assessor speaking test method? Firstly, it's very important to inform all candidates during the exam registration stage on your planned use of remote assessor speaking tests. And that should include what the candidates will expect on the day itself, because candidates may have read or viewed online videos about what Cambridge Assessment English speaking tests look like. And with a remote assessor, the setup will look very different. So you should warn them ahead of time what that might look like. Now, ensure your candidates sign the consent forms as per normal. But in this case, do mention the remote assessor speaking test in their consent forms during the registration stage as well. Also, do prepare labels with candidates' names so that the candidate can be identified on the video screen to the remote assessor during the speaking test itself. Next, all centers should subscribe to a suitable virtual meeting platform and not a free platform. This is because a free platform may have limited time duration on the use, and you do not want any disruptions during the speaking test itself. And paid for virtual meeting platforms also have additional security features, provides additional layer of security and ensures there's no disruption during your speaking test. Next, do schedule a practice session before the actual speaking test day itself. This is to ensure that the remote assessor, in this case the speaking examiner, is able to connect into the virtual meeting platform, and the remote assessor can see or hear the candidates and interlocutor during the speaking test itself. So do remember that the interlocutor still sits in the speaking test room itself. So we're talking about the so-called main suite or our Cambridge English qualifications, not the young learners, but key preliminary, first and so forth. So the interlocutor is still present there in the speaking test room. However, the remote assessor is sitting remotely away from the speaking test room. So the practice session will allow the remote assessor to run through the motions, test the equipment, test the platform, and ensure that he or she can hear and see the candidates and interlocutor. Now, the remote assessor who is located away from the speaking test room must still remain in a quiet room with no possible interruptions to the speaking test room. So if you do have your remote assessor asking where they should be seated, usually they will be seated at home. But please, if not, they should choose a quiet quiet environment, not in a cafe or in a restaurant and so forth. It has to be a quiet environment for them as well in order to carry out the speaking test. Now, the speaking test materials will need to be couriered to the remote assessor, so the speaking mark sheets and so forth need to be sent by courier to the remote assessor before the speaking test. Please do not email the scanned copies of the speaking test materials, as there are security risk in such distribution methods. Do give the exam venue supervisor's phone number to the remote assessor in case of emergencies. One is never sure of what might happen on the speaking test day itself. So if your remote assessor has any problems connecting into the video platform, for example, or is disrupted along the way during the speaking test, the remote assessor will have an emergency number to call into the exam venue to explain what is going on and to find a solution around it. So these are some of the steps that you should take note of for running a remote speaking session. And these are the steps before the actual speaking test day. On the screen itself here, you can see a sample screen, sample setup of what that remote assessor speaking test might look like. So for setting up the speaking test itself, please do note that your exam venue's speaking test room does need to have consistent Wi-Fi connectivity. So do test whether the internet connectivity is stable and consistent. You will need some equipment, in this case, a tablet or a laptop. If it's a tablet, please put it on a stand. And if it's a laptop, please ensure that the height of the laptop with its camera is it can view all the different stakeholders in the room. There should be a microphone attached to your laptop, or if it's not, to the tablet, so they can hear clearly what the candidates or interlocutor is saying. Of course, a webcam will be required if your tablet or your laptop or computer does not have a camera. So this will allow us to see all the different stakeholders on the screen itself. Please also ensure that the candidates and interlocutor are not seated too far away from each other so the candidates can be heard on the tablet or your laptop or computer's microphone. So ensure there's safe distancing, of course, but also ensure that the different stakeholders of the speaking test are audible. They can hear one another, even though it's going through the microphone. It's also very important to ensure that the setup allows the interlocutor to have a good view of the candidates. We have seen some setups where the camera or the tablet on a stand is actually blocking the view of the interlocutor. So the interlocutor cannot actually see the candidates. And this is a challenge. The interlocutor needs to see the candidates, and the candidates also need to see the interlocutor. So please ensure there's nothing blocking their views in between the different persons in the speaking test room. Lastly, as I mentioned earlier, provide labels with the candidate names for each candidate so that they can wear their name labels and be easily identified by the assessor who is viewing it remotely from the camera. So ensure that you have the right name on each of the candidates and they are identified correctly. So what happens on the day itself? Firstly, please do note that the Global Data Privacy Regulations, or GDPR restrictions, this is pertaining to the European Union GDPR data privacy regulations, must be adhered to. So centers are not allowed to record the speaking test, and it has to be marked in real time. So this remote assessor speaking test model has to be done in real time, and it cannot be recorded because of data privacy issues. The interlocutor should highlight the name and seating position of each candidate to the remote assessor before the speaking test starts to ensure that the correct marks are awarded to the correct candidate. So this is really critical. We do not want to make a mistake on the assessor giving the wrong marks to the wrong candidate. So it's very important that the interlocutor starts that speaking test by highlighting the name and the sitting position of each candidate to the remote assessor. And if the remote assessor, for whatever reason, is not able to hear or is not clear about which candidate, which candidate is sitting in which position, he or she should highlight that out to the interlocutor. The remote assessor should also mute his or her microphone during the speaking test unless there's some issue to highlight. This is to ensure there's no disruption from the remote assessor's location. It's being piped into the microphone to the actual exam venue itself. So please remind your remote assessors, mute their microphones unless there's something they need to highlight during the speaking test itself. Lastly, if the remote assessor is struggling to hear or see any of the candidates, they should mark as much as they can and leave blank any sections that they have been unable to assess. Then the remote assessor should immediately notify the exam venue supervisor, and this issue should be fixed before any more candidate into the speaking test room to take the next speaking test. The center should then apply to Cambridge English for special consideration. So fill out the special consideration form regarding these affected candidates. So we've seen situations where there might have been some disruptions and the remote assessor is not able to give marks to the candidates. So they should just mark as per normal up to the point where they're disrupted. And then the remote assessor should give a call to the exam venue supervisor to say that he or she cannot see or cannot hear properly the candidates' responses during the last speaking test. And then the supervisor should fill in the special consideration form and highlight this out to Cambridge English. Before I close this section, I would like to share a case study from one of our centers actually in Europe, in Greece. So this is a case study of a center called Euronasi SA. It's a center in Greece, and they had to run the remote assessor speaking test earlier this year. And this is a sharing from the academic director who runs the Euronasi SA. So on this center, the center is called Euronasi SA. It's located in Greece, and they implemented, or the country had implemented COVID-19 social distancing rules and safety measures earlier in June 2020 due to the pandemic. And because of these restrictions, the exam center had to adapt to the health and safety regulations in order to carry on running their exams, including the speaking test. So they had requested to use the remote assessor speaking test method, and they had practiced it for their B2 first exam. So they did this in the speaking test for B2 first. Now, the center had organized the exam venue in hotels itself, while the remote assessor, speaking examiner, was actually working from home. So the exam venue was actually in the hotels in different provinces of Greece, while the remote assessor had remained at home and dialed in for the speaking test. So this was some tips from the center itself on how best to use remote assessor speaking test. So firstly, their first tip is always inform the candidates about the remote assessor speaking test in advance, ideally even before they register for the exam, so that there's no surprises on the day. So in this case, the center informed the schools and prep centers that they work with that for this upcoming session, in this case in June of 2020, they're going to use the remote assessor speaking test. They also provided an FAQ sheet, a frequently asked questions sheet of answers to what most candidates all ask about this, and also their own staff. So straight away, they knew that there were going to be a lot of questions about how this remote assessor speaking test method works, and they wanted to reassure all of them. So they already prepared an FAQ just in case their staff had trouble trying to answer some of these questions. They also gave the tip that it's very important to explain the rationale for using the remote assessor speaking test to the candidates. So it's critical to remember not to assume that it will be just accepted if it's implemented. Do explain to your schools and preparation centers, and they should cascade it down to their students who are taking the exam at your center, why the remote assessor speaking test is being used as opposed to the regular speaking test. Now, more likely than not, it's going to be because your local government has put in place health and safety regulations during this COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe the speaking examiner is not able to travel to the arranged speaking test venue, or it could be because of capacity issues and your center is not able to arrange for so many persons to be sitting in a given space at any point of time. The next tip is that this center says definitely arrange a practice session in advance of the speaking test and do another practice just before the speaking test starts. So they're actually advising that do 2 rounds of practice before the speaking test starts, or before the actual speaking test starts itself. This is really just to ensure that there are no hiccups or there's no disruption on the actual day itself. And they also mentioned to use the exact same equipment and setup in the actual speaking test as those used for the practice session. So try as much as possible to use the exact same setup, exact same equipment during the practice run as if you will be doing the actual speaking test, so that you do not need to change the setup, you do not need to change the equipment and all the settings of the equipment as you had done, as you will do in your actual day itself. And last but not least, of course, do not forget the social distancing spacing between the individuals in the speaking test room. So what I mentioned earlier about making sure that all the different stakeholders, the interlocutor, the candidates, the remote assessor, all can hear each other. But within speaking test room itself, we still have to make sure that the social distancing is followed and there's adequate spacing between the interlocutor and the candidates itself. So this was an email that the center, Euronasi, had sent to all their schools and preparation centers before the exam date. This is just to update their schools and preparation centers about why there is a use of the remote assessor, what was the exam date itself, and what they should be expecting during the remote assessor speaking test. And this was a set of guidelines that Euronasi had sent to all their staff in the exam center in advance of the exam. You can see here, this will be probably atypical of their exam date. Because of COVID-19 pandemic, they had to put in some additional notes to their staff, and they shared this for different types of exams. And you can see here the use of safety equipment, social distancing, and so forth. So there's quite a lot of things that the staff had to take note of before the exam day itself. The equipment, so sample some screenshots of the equipment that they had used. So Euronasi had prepared safety equipment at the exam venue for not just the speaking test, but the actual exam day itself. So they provided the plastic face shields for their interlocutors, for their exam center staff, for their invigilators to use. They also provided antibacterial disinfectants to clean the areas around the speaking test venue as well as the rest of the exam venue, especially in the high touch areas of the exam venue. And so how was it? What was the feedback from the staff and candidates in Greece who were taking this speaking test using the remote assessor speaking test method? So some comments here mentioned that it was just like a normal test, no difference. Very pleasant for candidates, and candidates enjoyed the experience. Now, this was a case study of a remote assessor speaking test that went completely smoothly. So the feedback obviously can be seen here is very, very positive. But we always encourage all centers who want to use the remote assessor speaking test method to ensure that you're prepared for any disruptions, prepared for any plan Bs or contingencies. So the very first thing that we will recommend is just to inform your students and schools and preparation centers ahead of time that you're planning to use this method, because we do not want to we do not want our candidates or students to have any adverse reactions when they come in to see that all this video equipment and so forth is in the speaking test room. And it does affect the performance. It may affect the performance of the candidates when they are nervous, using all this video equipment. So this should be highlighted out and placed in the consent forms before the exam day itself. I think this is the last slide. So yes, this ends our webinar on remote proctoring and remote assessor speaking test. So both me and Ning will now jump into Q&A. And we see quite a lot of questions here. So I'm going to read them out. And the first question that we have, hi, what should we do in case there is an issue with the connection or equipment on the exam day itself, even though we already practiced the setup a day before? Should we continue the speaking test, or will it be considered invalid? So again, in regards to this question, what happens if there really is an issue with the hardware, the equipment on the day itself, or there's a connection issue? It really depends on how bad the connection issue is or how bad the equipment issue is. Now, if it's for instance, if the Wi-Fi is dropping or had dropped and the remote assessor had been cut off on the video connection, if you can get back on the video connection, then just put in the special considerations form, and for the exam venue supervisor or the remote assessor to make sure they're contacting one another to reassure that they're continuing with the exam. If it's an equipment issue that fails on the day itself, but you're somehow able to get it up and running again, similarly, please align on both sides with the remote assessor as well as the speaking test room, the persons in the speaking test room itself. Put in the special considerations form so that we are aware that there was that disruption. If the disruption is permanent, that means your equipment just cannot be revived or the internet connection just dies entirely, then it probably will need to discontinue that speaking test. You will need to address it with, firstly, the actual students or candidates in that particular speaking test session which was disrupted. Put in the special considerations form so we know that particular part of that speaking test for those candidates had the disruption. Now, for the other candidates waiting outside or about to take their speaking test for that day, you do need to inform them that for, in this case, emergency issues or technical issues, you're not able to continue the speaking test. Then you will need to ensure that they are informed as soon as possible and as soon as you've confirmed that there is no way that you can continue the speaking test, and then you will need to rearrange for a separate speaking test. If you are not sure, please do give a call to our help desk or go on an online live chat on the support website, on Cambridge English support website straight away. If you're not sure, just call the help desk or go on to the live chat to get advice on the situation. Next question. Is there any reason the labels with candidates' names as shown couldn't be used in the normal face-to-face speaking exams? It is easier for the speaking examiner to use the candidate name, more interlocutor facial contact with the candidate, and avoids them from making a note, less risk of mark sheets being incorrectly positioned by the remote assessor. Is there any reason the labels with candidate names could not be used in normal face-to-face? So the name labels, the candidate labels, I do not believe there is a different version of it. I'm not sure if that is what the question is asking. It will be the normal labels, any normal name labels that you use. The only thing that your center needs to be aware of is to ensure that the right candidate's name is placed on the right candidate, and most importantly, that the interlocutor highlights to the remote assessor who's not in that room which candidate is sitting which position, so that the remote assessor is clear on this point before the speaking test starts. Next question, can we use the remote speaking test for C1 Advanced? I do remember that this is not for C1 Advanced. Let me double check on this, but if I remember correctly, the remote assessor speaking test is not for C1 Advanced. But we will check this and reconfirm. Next question, what if the remote assessor lives in another city that we need extra days to receive the speaking test mark sheets from them? Should we need to wait for it, or can we send the other exam materials, such as the reading, listening, and writing materials, in a separate package? This really depends on the logistics of how far away is your remote assessor based. So if your remote assessor is based in another city, and you believe that you need extra time, in this case, extra days to get the speaking mark sheets to them, then please make sure that if you can separate out the packages, then separate them out and send them separately. Ultimately, all the exam materials need to reach the remote assessor before the speaking test day itself. So it really depends on where your remote assessor is located and how much time it requires for a courier in your particular country to reach your remote assessor. We have a question from one of our senders in Japan, Makiko, who has asked that in case we need to call for a remote assessor, do we need to inform Cambridge Assessment English? And if yes, who should they inform? So if you do need to use the remote assessor speaking test method, just highlight it to your local Cambridge Assessment English representative that you are using this method. You do not need to inform the regional office, but please also just send an email to identifying your exam center ID number and the exam type and the exam date that you're using the remote assessor speaking test. Our help desk will inform the team that will be doing the post-exam marking and post-exam processes that your center has used this remote assessor speaking test method, so that they have a record of it. So that if there's any queries on, say that a disruption had happened on the speaking test day itself, or that maybe any other issues on the speaking test day itself, our colleagues that are doing the marks are aware of the fact that your center had done the remote assessor speaking tests. Next question, during the speaking test, you mentioned that it's best to have labels for candidates so that the remote assessor is aware of who prepares the label. The exam center prepares the labels, so just ensure that you have those sticker labels that you often use for events, and make sure that you write the correct candidate, the correct label, and that you give the right label to the right candidate, and to highlight it to the remote assessor before the speaking test starts. So the remote assessor knows which candidate is the name of each candidate and where is that candidate sitting. Next question, will remote proctoring be available for paper-based qualifications? I'm going to pass this to Ning. Ning, would you like to share more on this question? Will remote proctoring be available for paper-based qualifications?
Thank you, Justin. So far, our remote proctoring solution is only be used for the linguist skill right now, not for all our paper-based qualifications.
Okay, thanks, Ning. Just going to look into the chat room. Okay, thanks for highlighting it. So yeah, our colleague Young, as well as one of our participants, has confirmed that yes, so C1 Advanced actually is allowed the remote assessor speaking test is allowed for the C1 Advanced exam. So I stand corrected. You can use the remote assessor speaking test for C1 Advanced. I see another question here that might have been missed earlier. So I think there was a question about many of your presenters before emphasized that LinguaSkill is an institutional product. Why are we suggesting a B2C model here? Isn't it confusing for the market and now competing LinguaSkill with the other Cambridge English exams? Before I answer this, maybe Ning, you want to share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I can pick up these questions. In fact, the remote proctoring solution is not only for the B2C model, but also for the B2B model as well. So in this case, we just share a case study, and it's not only for the B2C model. The registration portal in my deck is normally for the B2C model. So there is no conflict between the remote proctoring solution with our marketing strategy and the sales strategy. For the LinguaSkill, yes, we still regard it as the institutional product. At the same time, during the coronavirus, we also can provide the availability and the feasibility for our test takers to take the test from home. I don't think there is any conflict between these two models. Thank you.
Thanks, Ning. If you have any other questions, do pop it into our Q&A box here. Okay, I see a few more here. So we'll continue with our Q&A box here. Question is, to clarify, can we use the name labels in a normal speaking exam with two speaking examiners to avoid SEs having to follow the standard procedure of making a discrete note of names at the start and writing them down? I see where the clarification comes from. So I think the question is asking whether the name labels that we advise for the remote assessor speaking test, can we use it in a normal speaking test environment so that speaking examiners do not need to make that discrete note of names at the start? So that's usual procedure in a normal speaking test, the non-remote version. I believe that the standard procedure still stands to put a discrete note of the names at the start. The name labels, I believe it's out of circumstance and to avoid any risk of giving the wrong speaking test marks to the wrong candidate. And it's why those name labels are used. We can check on this to see if name labels will be allowed for a normal speaking test exam, but I believe we will follow normal standard procedure for this. How do we handle students who are at high risk? For example, if they have some medical issues or if they are diabetic. So for such high risk students attending the speaking test, how do we handle such situations? Are there any extra guidelines on the use of masks and social distancing? So for the first question, how do we handle students or candidates who might have some medical history and who are attending the speaking test? I think firstly, it's important that your staff at your center are aware of any candidates who have any medical history. So at registration, the candidates need to be made aware that, and you can do this through the consent form or through a standard procedure of what your center staff do at registration stage to inform the students, ask them, do you have any medical history? Or you can put this down in the form as well. So firstly, be aware whether the student has any medical history, and you need to proactively ask them during the registration stage. Now, if you do find out they have some medical history, it's important on the day itself at the exam venue, that all your staff at exam venue know which is the student that has that medical history. And when the student arrives at the exam venue, he or she should be highlighted. It should be highlighted to their staff. We will advise that the exam supervisor pay particular close attention to that particular student or students who are having some sort of medical history. Do check as well if they have any medication, any pills or medical equipment that they need to have with them, right? If it's equipment and you can't bring it into the room, or if it's even just medication and not bring it into the room, then the exam center supervisor should be aware of where it's being kept. So in case if during the exam itself or the speaking test itself, they need to go retrieve it, they know where to retrieve it very quickly. That will be our advice. But I think the most important thing, firstly, is to be aware that that particular candidate has a medical history. Otherwise, it's probably going to be very difficult to attend to the situation. Yeah. Any extra guidelines on mask or social distancing? We do have it on our Cambridge English Support website on COVID-19 pandemic guidelines, but please also take note that that's just a general guideline on social distancing, on use of health and safety equipment. We are aware that every country and every city may have different local laws and local regulations. So our advice will be first and foremost, refer to your local government's or local health authorities' guidelines to see what they instruct all exam centers to do, and then refer to our general guidelines. Yeah. Because we have situations where our guidelines may not be sufficient to meet your local government's regulations. So we just want our partners out there to be aware that the first and foremost, be very sure what your local government is instructing and meet those requirements first before referring to what you see on our support website. We have a few more minutes. Just looking at the clock here, with a few more minutes for any other questions that you may have. Please put it into the Q&A box. And if not, Ning, any final thoughts before we close the webinar?
No more questions from my end. I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate your support. I mean, all of our CEM's support during this special period. Thanks for your support. Yeah.
Yes, definitely echo Ning's message of thanks here. It's been a very challenging 2020. This calendar year, I believe all of us agree, has been one of the most challenging years we've come across. And all our centers have done a fantastic job to try to push ahead and try to adapt to the new situation that we have. We understand that in many cities still, exam sessions might not be allowed to continue or might not be able to continue because of restrictions. We do wish that all our centers there will be able to resume the exams, and that it be done safely and with all candidates and exam center staff in mind. So with that, we would like to draw to a close our third and final topic webinar for this Thursday. That leaves us with our one last webinar session tomorrow afternoon. That's tomorrow afternoon, 2:30 p.m. Singapore, Beijing time, or whichever part of the region or around the world you're in. We have our panel discussion where we will talk about how the education sector tries to recover from COVID-19. We'll have 6 panelists, including our leaders from Cambridge English, as well as some guest speakers. If you've not registered for it or if you cannot find the Zoom link for it, please do drop us an email. But if not, please do join us tomorrow, our last day for our 2020 Cambridge Assessment English Asia Pacific Partners meeting. So with that, I'll draw to a close. Thank you for taking time to join us here today. I wish you a very good evening, good night, and we'll see you tomorrow on Friday. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.